An introduction to a peerless reinvention and two others. This is part of a trilogy of poems I'll be putting up over the next 4 weeks. I think of them as a trilogy because they were all born from a single experience, a single moment, and from the same few lines I jotted down as they came to mind. About 6 years ago I was returning to Liverpool from Manchester Airport. I had landed a couple of hours earlier after spending a fortnight in Australia with my children, and was sitting exhausted in the train, already preparing myself to get back to work in the next few hours. The train heads back into central Manchester and passes what seemed to be endless rows of old terraced houses. I watched them pass, all to the persistent clickety-clack of the wheels going over the steel joints in the track, like a rhythm beating through time, and it made me consider the windows of these houses, like eyes looking out on the world, wondering what they had seen over the 100 years or so they had been there. So pulling out a scrap of paper, I quickly scribbled a few ideas, thoughts. It wasn't very much. It makes little sense in itself. And they were clickety-clack, Manchester, Derby, Liverpool crew. 10,000 eyes staring at you, the hovels, the dwellings, the houses that watch as you pass by their gardens with hasty dispatch. The growth of an empire, now sedentary and still, the growth of the world, stagnant. It does not make much sense in itself, but rarely do my rants of impressions make a general sense. They are there as impressions to help me, sometimes years later, 6 in this case, to place myself back inside that train, feel the lethargy and the tiredness, but also the sense of time, the vastness of humanity, the onslaught of change, which I had considered in those few moments. About 4 months ago, I pulled these up out of my catalogue of ramblings and sat staring at them, wondering about them, trying to recapture that feeling. The words mean little. There was no sense of poetry in them. But after a day or so considering them and going through copious cups of coffee, an idea coalesced and I began writing. After about 3 weeks, I had written 3 very different yet connected poems. 2 are fairly long and the third shorter, snappier. The first one I'm going to read is an actual fact, the second I created. The next will be the first, which I thought would exhaust the idea, but merely drove me on to write the second poem, and then finally I will read the short. I considered spacing them out, but to me they're all part of the same, so I shall keep them together. They're entitled in the order I shall bring them to you: A Peerless Reinvention, A Girdle of Steel, and Clickety-Clack. I sincerely hope you enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoyed the process of their creation. And now I shall read the poem.